Lieutenant Sarah Thompson's boots hit the steel deck of the helicopter platform with a dull thud, echoing in the early morning mist. The wind off the Pacific whipped her hair across her face, salted by the briny spray carried in from the churning waves below. She squinted against the harsh sunlight glinting off the base's metallic structures, a sprawling fortress that seemed almost carved from the cliffs themselves. Her duffel bag, heavy with the weight of gear, drills, and memories of countless hours of preparation, swung against her leg with every step. Each movement was deliberate, every step a silent declaration. She was here, and she was ready. From the edges of the platform, she could see the first signs of life on the base. Men in fatigues moved with precision, their boots scuffing concrete. As they carried rifles, ammunition, and a sense of purpose that seemed almost predatory in its intensity. Some glanced at her, a flicker of curiosity crossing tired faces, but others smirked or whispered. She caught fragments of sentences. "She won't last a week. Women aren't built for this." And even she'd dropped that weapon, the first time it kicks back. A pang of irritation rose, but she swallowed it down, converting it into fuel. She had heard this before too many times, but the doubters had always been wrong. And she intended to make sure history repeated itself. On her terms this time. The smell of salt and gunpowder clung to the air, mingling with the faint tang of diesel and sweat. Sarah adjusted the strap of her duffel, feeling the muscles in her shoulder tighten in response. She had trained for years for this moment. Countless mornings had begun before dawn, long runs through the misty hills of San Diego, her lungs screaming for oxygen as her legs burned. Endless hours at the shooting range, memorizing the recoil patterns of rifles and pistols. Every drop of sweat, every blistered hand, every sleepless night spent studying combat manuals had led to this day. Doubt didn't live here, not in her mind. She had honed herself into a weapon of precision, and today she would test herself against the toughest training ground in the world. As she walked toward the main compound, she noticed the subtle hierarchy of the base. Younger trainees hustled to follow orders, their eyes darting nervously, while seasoned SEALs moved with the quiet confidence of men who had stared death in the face and returned. Some paused to watch her, heads tilted slightly, measuring her presence. She could sense the whispers even without hearing them. In these environments, subtle glances, tightened jaws, and sideways smirks spoke volumes. The weight of expectation and skepticism pressed down on her shoulders like the ocean wind, but she welcomed it. Pressure sharpened focus. Fear could be harnessed. Doubt could be silenced. Sarah's gaze traveled to the towering armory at the center of the base, its doors reinforced with steel and guarded by sharp-eyed instructors. The smell of oil, metal, and gunpowder seemed to emanate even from the distance, a sensory promise of the tests to come. She had handled weapons since she was a teenager, her father a retired Marine who had drilled her in discipline and marksmanship. But this was different. This was a proving ground where skill alone was not enough. Resilience, composure, and mental toughness were equally critical. And yet, as her boots crunched on gravel and concrete, she felt a calm clarity settle over her. She was ready to prove not just her skill, but her presence, her endurance, her worth. The helicopter's rotors had ceased their deafening roar, leaving only the distant crash of waves and the low hum of activity on the base. Sarah paused, taking in the scene. The barracks stretched in rigid lines, their windows reflecting sunlight like watchful eyes. Training grounds were scattered strategically. Obstacle courses with ropes, walls, and balance beams. Shooting ranges with targets lined like silent sentinels. And open fields where drills would push the body and mind to their limits. Each location seemed to call out a challenge, daring her to falter. She welcomed the call. The scent of challenge, of salt, of discipline. It all felt like home. Her first steps onto the base drew more attention than she expected. Conversations faltered mid-word as men glanced at her. A few raised eyebrows, a few exchanged smirks. It wasn't outright hostility, yet, but the judgment was palpable. She had anticipated this. She had prepared for it. In her mind, she rehearsed. Calm responses, yet she knew she wouldn't need them. Her weapon wasn't words. It was performance. Skill spoke louder than argument, and she intended to let hers roar louder than any whisper of doubt. Sarah's mind drifted briefly to the journey that had brought her here. The grueling months of prep school for officer candidates. The early mornings she had run while others slept. The countless hours mastering both firearms and strategy. She thought of her family, her father's quiet pride, her mother's unwavering belief in her determination. The years of small victories, injuries, setbacks, and triumphs had all been preparation for this. And now, standing on the edge of the Pacific, feeling the spray of salt on her skin, she knew the real test was about to begin. Not the weapons, not the drills, not even the physical trials, but the challenge of being underestimated, doubted, and scrutinized at every turn. Her boots echoed on the steel platform as she approached the main gate. A young officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand, his expression a mix of curiosity and polite reserve. "Lieutenant Thompson?" he asked. She nodded. "Welcome to the base. Orientation starts in 15 minutes. Follow me." She did, walking past the rows of barracks and training facilities, her mind cataloging every detail of the placement. Of obstacles, the distance between the armory and the firing range, the route to the swimming trials. Every piece of information was a tool she would use, an advantage she would seize. As she entered the central training hall, the air shifted. The smell of gunpowder was stronger here, mingled with sweat and the faint metallic scent of weapons freshly polished. Men and women, mostly men in this phase, were gathering for the first briefing. Eyes flicked toward her as she walked in, some with open curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. A few whispered too quietly for her to hear, but the body language was unmistakable. She could feel the skepticism pressing against her. A male trainee seated near the front leaned over and muttered, "You don't really think you belong here, do you?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, offering nothing but a polite smile. He stiffened, unprepared for calm in the face of provocation. The briefing began with an instructor outlining the rigorous schedule: physical training, weapon drills, tactical exercises, endurance tests, and live fire evaluations. Each description painted a picture of intensity, danger, and unyielding expectation. Sarah listened intently, taking notes mentally, already planning how she would pace herself, when she would push, when she would conserve energy. Her eyes scanned the room subtly, taking in the expressions of her fellow trainees, some anxious, some confident, all unaware of the storm she was about to unleash silently through skill and determination. By the end of the briefing, Sarah's presence had begun to ripple through the room, subtle but undeniable. Men who had smirked moments before now exchanged uneasy glances. Instructors, watching her quietly, noted her posture, her focus, the way her hands rested lightly on her duffel, and her gear. She had made no announcements, no proclamations, no speeches. She simply stood, calm, attentive, and ready. In this world, actions mattered more than words, and she had already begun to let her speak. As the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the waves and metallic surfaces of the base, Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation surge through her. This was her arena. The whispers, the skepticism, the doubts, they were not obstacles, but invitations. She had prepared for this moment every day of her life. Every challenge she had faced until now had led her to the edge of the Pacific cliffs, to this base, and to the waiting eyes of doubters. Today, she would not just participate. She would demonstrate, quietly and powerfully, that skill, discipline, and courage knew no gender. And with that, Lieutenant Sarah Thompson took her first steps toward the armory, toward the weapons she knew better than most, toward the rigorous trials that would define her, and toward a future where every doubt whispered against her would be silenced not by words, but by undeniable performance. She was ready, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing the real story was about to begin. The armory smelled of oil, gunpowder, and cold metal, a scent that felt both familiar and exhilarating to Sarah Thompson. She stepped inside, her boots echoing against the concrete floor, the sound amplified by the high ceilings and rows of polished weapons. Shelves of rifles, pistols, and combat gear stretched along the walls, each piece meticulously organized, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Instructors stood at intervals, arms crossed, observing every trainee with eyes that missed nothing. Sarah felt their gaze on her almost immediately. A few of the male trainees exchanged subtle smirks and whispered, clearly expecting her to falter. Her duffel thudded to the floor, and she bent to inspect her gear, her fingers gliding across the familiar contours of her pistols. Years of training had honed her touch. She could disassemble and reassemble each weapon blindfolded, every movement precise. The men around her were attempting to look casual, but the tension in their shoulders betrayed them. One muttered under his breath, "She won't make it through the first drill," and a ripple of suppressed laughter followed. Sarah's jaw tightened. Let them doubt. That skepticism would only make her victory more potent. The first exercise was a simple weapons drill, yet in a SEAL context, simple was a cruel misnomer. Each trainee was handed a rifle, a magazine, and a small stack of targets, and instructed to demonstrate handling, loading, and firing techniques under the strictest scrutiny. Sarah moved deliberately, every action controlled and exact, as though the weapon were an extension of her own body. She adjusted her stance, checked her sights, and let her first round fly. Then it happened. A male trainee, overconfident and careless, misfired. The rifle kicked unpredictably, the sound loud and jarring in the enclosed space, and laughter erupted. Sarah felt a fleeting pang of irritation, but controlled it instantly. Her mind focused, sharpening to a singular clarity. When it was her turn, she approached her rifle with calm precision, loading it smoothly, checking the chamber, and taking aim. Her first shot hit dead center. The second, third, fourth each round struck its mark with unwavering accuracy. Heads turned. The instructor's eyebrows arched, subtle but unmistakable signs of approval. The men who had whispered and laughed now watched with wide eyes. Sarah could feel the shift in the room, the silent recalibration of expectations. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. Her expression remained neutral, her focus unbroken. Her performance had made the first ripple of doubt in the base. Skill, she thought, could silence more than words ever could. Next came the timed maneuvering exercise, where trainees had to move through an obstacle-laden course while handling weapons. Sarah approached it strategically, observing the placement of barriers, the angles of potential cover, and the trajectory needed for precise target engagement. She ducked under low beams, vaulted over walls, and slid across the slick floor with a grace that belied the strain on her muscles. Each movement was calculated, efficient, and powerful. A male trainee tried to rush past her at a narrow turn, sneering. "Don't get in my way, Thompson," he hissed. Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she adjusted her path, using her smaller frame to navigate the obstacle more quickly and with greater balance. She shot first to clear targets, her shots hitting every mark, then sprinted ahead. By the time the men realized she had passed them, she was already completing the next segment of the course. A few jaws dropped. Instructors nodded silently, noting her adaptability and composure under pressure. Outside, the midday sun beat down on the base, the heat rising off concrete surfaces and metal railings. Sweat slicked her hair to her face, her uniform clinging to her in uncomfortable patterns, yet she ignored the discomfort. Focus was everything. Distraction could be fatal in this environment. Her heart pounded rhythmically, matching the cadence of her movements. This was not merely training. It was the first day of proving herself in a crucible designed to test every skill, every ounce of endurance, every second of composure. During a brief break, she observed the other trainees. Some struggled to reload efficiently, fumbling magazines, or misaligning their sights. A few cursed under their breath, frustration flaring. One man turned and sneered at her again, attempting to intimidate. Sarah's gaze met his for a heartbeat. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked past, lifting her water bottle, taking a sip as if the confrontation hadn't occurred. The unspoken message was clear. She wouldn't fight with words, only with skill. Her calm confidence unnerved them more than any shouting could. The next drill involved moving and shooting while under timed pressure, combining agility, accuracy, and composure. Sarah approached it as she had every exercise, methodically, with unwavering focus. The instructors observed, noting her posture, her breathing, her ability to maintain precision while moving. As she navigated the targets, she noticed one male trainee struggling with his rifle, fumbling repeatedly. She didn't look away. She didn't offer help. She simply executed her movements flawlessly, her rounds hitting their marks with uncanny consistency. By the time the drill ended, whispers had shifted to grudging admiration. Yet the real challenge came in the form of a sudden, unannounced leave-fire scenario. Instructors arranged targets at varying distances, some partially obscured by obstacles. Trainees had to engage accurately under pressure, maintaining composure and control. Sarah's pulse accelerated, but her focus sharpened. She adjusted her stance, calculated the recoil, and fired with pinpoint accuracy. Each shot struck the intended target, even the most difficult ones, partially hidden behind barriers. The echo of her rifle in the enclosed range silenced the room. Instructors paused, their eyes following her every movement. Even the skeptics, those who had doubted her presence here, remained silent, stunned. By late afternoon, the first day was drawing to a close. Physical exertion and mental intensity weighed heavily on the trainees. Sweat-streaked faces and tired bodies told the story of the day's rigor. Sarah, however, felt a sense of exhilaration she couldn't quite name. She had survived the initial tests, and more than that, she had made an impression. She had turned skepticism into astonishment with nothing more than quiet, deliberate action. As the trainees gathered for debriefing, the instructors offered feedback. Sarah's performance was highlighted not as an anomaly, but as an example of focus, discipline, and skill under pressure. Some male trainees shifted uneasily in their seats, avoiding her gaze, as if her presence alone reminded them of their own faltering efforts. One whispered, "I didn't think she could do it," and a ripple of agreement passed through the room. She smiled faintly, inwardly acknowledging their thoughts, but remaining outwardly calm. Victory was silent. It was in every precise movement, every target hit, every controlled breath. Evening fell over the base, the ocean reflecting streaks of pink and gold across the horizon. Sarah returned to her quarters, muscles aching, hands blistered, yet her mind was alive with analysis. She replayed every drill, every shot, every interaction, noting strengths and areas for improvement. She knew the first day had been more than a test of skill. It had been a test of perception. She had begun to reshape the base's view of her not through argument or defiance, but through undeniable performance. That night, as she lay on the narrow cot in the barracks, the sounds of the ocean and distant training exercises mingling with the hum of fluorescent lights, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The whispers, the smirks, the doubt, they had all existed before she arrived, and they would continue to exist in some form, for as long as women challenged expectations in this world. But she had learned something vital. Respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. And today, quietly, efficiently, she had begun earning it. She closed her eyes, feeling both exhaustion and anticipation. Tomorrow promised new challenges, longer drills, and tougher tests. But for the first time, she felt that subtle shift, the acknowledgement, however unspoken, that she belonged here. Not just physically, but mentally, strategically, emotionally. She was a presence that could not be ignored. And as sleep claimed her, Sarah's mind drifted toward the morrow. Each weapon, each obstacle, each test waiting for her would become another opportunity, not just to survive, but to excel. She understood that her journey here would be measured not by words spoken or whispers silenced, but by action, precision, and perseverance. Tomorrow, the base would see more of what she was capable of, and this time, no one would be able to deny it. Dawn arrived as a pale golden promise, brushing the cliffs of the Seal base with the first light of day. The ocean's roar mingled with the distant calls of instructors, signaling the start of what would be the grueling physical trials. Sarah. Thompson's eyes opened to the faint smell of salt and seaweed carried in on the wind. Her body ached from the first day's drills, yet every muscle was alive with anticipation. She swung her legs over the cot, planting her boots firmly on the floor. Today would test endurance, resilience, and stamina in ways that only SEAL training could. The base was already stirring. Male trainees ran in tight formations across the concrete paths, their breath visible in the early chill. Others adjusted their gear, stretching, and preparing for the day's first trial, an open-water swim, followed by a rigorous obstacle course that tested every inch of body and mind. Whispers of skepticism about Sarah's presence still floated through the air, subtle yet persistent. "She's strong, but can she last through the swim?" one trainee murmured. Sarah ignored the remark, tightening the straps of her wetsuit. Skepticism had been her companion before, but it had never slowed her. The instructors gathered the trainees near the waterline. "Today, you'll push beyond comfort," barked Commander Reynolds, his voice carrying across the waves. "Endurance, precision, and calm under stress determine survival. Failure is not an option." His eyes lingered on Sarah, an unspoken challenge in their steel-like depth. She met it head-on, feeling the surge of adrenaline sharpening her focus. Her heart pounded with the rhythm of anticipation. Every beat was a reminder that her years of preparation had led to this precise moment. The water was icy, a sharp shock against her skin as she plunged in. The first strokes were a struggle for everyone, but Sarah's training carried her forward. She maintained perfect rhythm, her arms slicing through the water with precision, legs propelling her efficiently. Salt stung her eyes, but she refused to blink away the sting, knowing it was part of the test. Around her, some men splashed recklessly, fatigued already by the chill, their strokes uneven. A few gasped for air, sputtering. Sarah's breathing remained controlled, steady, almost meditative, a calm center amid chaos. Emerging from the water, muscles trembling from exertion, she transitioned seamlessly to the obstacle course. Lo! Beams, rope climbs, walls, balance beams, and mud pits awaited, each designed to test coordination, strength, and mental toughness. Trainees around her grunted, slipping and stumbling, while she moved deliberately, each motion economical, precise. Rope climbs that seemed impossible to some were conquered with ease. Walls that challenged balance were scaled with fluid grace. Her small frame allowed her to navigate the course faster, more efficiently, and with less wasted energy than many of the bulkier trainees. By mid-morning, the first obstacle set the tone for the rest of the day. Sarah approached the rope climb, a vertical stretch that had made several men falter. Her hands gripped the fibers, muscles coiled with strength, honed through years of training. Up she went, smooth, swift, methodical. Every second counted. By the time she reached the top and swung her legs over the final bar, the men who had doubted her were staring, slack-jawed, unable to conceal surprise. Instructor Reynolds' eyes glinted with something almost like admiration. Sarah did not. Pause, continuing her run, the rhythm of her movements unbroken. The next challenge was a crawling drill through a narrow tunnel filled with mud and water. Claustrophobia and physical exhaustion combined to make it brutal. Trainees behind her struggled, some screaming in frustration, others coughing. Yet Sarah advanced with unbroken determination. Her mind focused on nothing but the path ahead, her body responding instinctively. Each movement was controlled, conserving energy where possible, using leverage where necessary. By the time she emerged on the other side, dripping with mud, her presence had begun to redefine the room. Skepticism had softened into tentative respect. The whispers that followed her were quieter, more cautious. A sprint through the open field was next, the ground uneven and littered with obstacles. She surged forward, every stride perfectly timed, every breath measured. Around her, men gasped for oxygen, some collapsing in exhaustion. Sarah's pulse remained steady, her lungs expanding and contracting efficiently. As she leapt over a low wall, she glanced briefly at a trainee struggling behind her. He looked over, eyes wide, a mix of surprise and dawning respect. Sarah didn't stop to encourage him. Her pace was relentless. In this environment, perseverance spoke louder than words, and she was setting the standard. By mid-afternoon, the physical test escalated further. Heavy packs, full of gear and ammunition, were strapped to their backs. Trainees had to carry them across uneven terrain, simulating combat conditions. Many faltered, muscles burning, sweat blinding their vision. Sarah's preparation shone here most clearly. Each step was deliberate, her balance unwavering despite the strain. She passed struggling male trainees, some of whom had initially doubted her, their expressions shifting from superiority to astonishment. The weight of her pack was significant, yet she moved with an elegance and efficiency that made the task appear almost effortless. Then came the endurance swim, a test of mental fortitude as much as physical capability. The water, colder than before, threatened to sap strength and focus. Currents tugged at limbs, waves crashed against bodies, and panic rose in those unprepared for the challenge. Sarah's technique, honed through countless hours of open water training, carried her forward. Each stroke was deliberate, conserving energy while maximizing propulsion. Her body moved in near-perfect rhythm, and her mind remained razor-sharp. She had learned long ago that survival depended not on brute force alone, but on calculated efficiency, and she executed it flawlessly. Exiting the water, the final leg of the day was a grueling run uphill, weighted with fatigue and muscle burn. Each trainee pushed themselves to exhaustion, but Sarah's conditioning allowed her to maintain a steady pace. Men who had mocked her on arrival now struggled to keep up. She could hear heavy breathing behind her, feet pounding uneven terrain, the occasional curse or grunt of frustration. Sarah's focus remained inward, on rhythm, on strategy, on balance. With every step, she felt the cumulative effect of years of preparation propelling her forward. By the time the trials concluded, the trainees were battered, exhausted, and sweat-soaked. Some collapsed to the ground, Others leaned on each other for support, while Sarah stood upright, breathing hard, but composed, surveying the aftermath. Her body ached in every muscle, yet her mind was clear and alert. Instructor Reynolds approached, his usual stern expression softened by an almost imperceptible smile. "Impressive," he said quietly, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You set a standard today. Not bad for your first full day." Around her, the atmosphere had shifted subtly but irrevocably. The male trainees who had doubted her presence, who had whispered about her inability to endure, now looked at her with cautious admiration. She hadn't needed to shout, argue, or force recognition. Her performance, her resilience, had done that for her. A few younger trainees, eyes wide with wonder, began asking quiet questions, curious about her methods, her preparation, her mindset. Sarah smiled faintly to herself, knowing that the seeds of respect had been planted. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the base in shades of amber and crimson, Sarah returned to the barracks, every joint screaming, but her spirit invigorated. She reflected on the day, replaying each obstacle, each drill, each glance of doubt and astonishment. She had faced the first real test and emerged not just intact, but commanding attention, subtly reshaping perceptions with her quiet strength. She lay on the cot, muscles trembling with exhaustion, reviewing every moment in her mind. The rope climbs, the swims, the sprints, they had all tested her physical limits. But more importantly, they had tested her mental endurance, her ability to maintain calm and precision under relentless scrutiny. She realized then that the true battle on the SEAL base wasn't only about strength or skill. It was about perception, resilience, and the quiet assertion of competence in the face of doubt. Sleep claimed her slowly, mingled with the distant sound of the ocean and the hum of training lights. She knew the next day would bring even tougher challenges. Weapons drills under fatigue, tactical exercises with higher stakes, and perhaps even confrontation with those still unwilling to accept her. Yet for the first time, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction. She had survived the first wave, and she had not just survived, she had excelled. And as the base settled into the soft murmur of night, she allowed herself one thought: tomorrow, the challenge would rise, but so would she. The morning air on the SEAL base was sharp and bracing, carrying the scent of salt and the faint tang of gunpowder lingering from the previous day's drills. Sarah Thompson woke to the muffled sounds of the ocean crashing against the cliffs, a rhythmic reminder that this place demanded strength, resilience, and focus. Her muscles were sore, her hands blistered, and yet her mind was already running through the day's schedule. Weapon drills, endurance exercises, and tactical maneuvers. Physical exhaustion was part of the process, but the real test, she knew, was navigating the attitudes, doubts, and subtle hostility of those around her. By breakfast, the whispers had already begun. A few male trainees, emboldened by their initial skepticism, exchanged glances and smirks as they ate. "She thinks she can keep up with us?" One muttered, barely audible. Another laughed quietly, though it carried enough to reach the corner of the mess hall where Sarah sat. She didn't react outwardly, keeping her gaze on her tray as she methodically ate, silently absorbing the environment. She had learned long ago that confrontation wasn't always about words. Sometimes, composure was the deadliest weapon. The morning briefing brought them together, and the instructors outlined the next phase, a combination of endurance exercises and tactical drills. Sarah listened intently, absorbing every detail, mentally mapping the challenges and calculating her approach. Around her, the male trainees shifted, occasionally casting sideways glances, some brimming with doubt, others with thinly veiled irritation at her presence. One man whispered something under his breath, intentional or not, but it was enough to create tension in the room. Sarah ignored it, letting her calm demeanor speak louder than any retort. As the first exercise began, a tactical maneuver through a simulated combat scenario, the mental strain became immediately apparent. Trainees had to move stealthily through uneven terrain, handling weapons while coordinating with partners under strict time constraints. Some male trainees, frustrated by her presence, attempted to assert dominance by taking charge, issuing curt commands in hushed tones. Sarah, however, moved with quiet authority, her actions precise, her decisions calculated. She didn't argue or overstep. She simply executed with efficiency. In the end, her performance spoke louder than any words could. Midway through the exercise, one of the louder skeptics tried to provoke her directly. "You're lucky the instructor's like you," he muttered, barely disguising a smirk. Most women couldn't even handle this without falling apart. Sarah's response was internal, measured, a flash of clarity rather than anger. She tightened her grip on her rifle, adjusted her stance, and continued moving through the exercise with unbroken focus. Her actions steady, controlled, and precise answered the challenge in a way words never could. Every target hit, every tactical decision executed flawlessly, made the whispering man's comment irrelevant. By noon, the exercises escalated in intensity. Trainees were exhausted, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Sarah felt the strain too, but it was different. Hers was tempered by preparation and mental discipline. Her body moved automatically, memory and training guiding her through each maneuver. She could hear frustrated breaths behind her, the occasional curse, the uneven sounds of fatigue and struggle. Yet she remained calm, focused, and methodical, even when a misstep nearly cost her balance during a climb. She corrected instantly, landing safely and continuing without hesitation. Her poise under pressure began to earn the first glances of genuine respect from some of the male trainees. The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge, a weapon drill under fatigue. Trainees were tasked with engaging targets while running through uneven terrain, simulating the stress and unpredictability of combat. Many faltered, accuracy slipping as exhaustion set in. Sarah, however, maintained precision. Her mind calculated each movement, adjusting her aim and timing, her body responding with the discipline of thousands of hours of practice. Her rounds struck their targets with uncanny consistency, and the instructors noticed, nodding subtly. Even the most vocal skeptics were forced to acknowledge her competence silently. During a brief break, a group of trainees attempted to corner her. "Do you even realize how out of place you are?" One hissed, his tone edged with irritation. Another chimed in, "You're not a SEAL. You'll never keep up." Sarah met their gaze calmly. She didn't argue or justify herself. Instead, she simply walked away, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her silence was intentional, a statement that she didn't need to validate herself through confrontation. Respect was earned through action, and she intended to let her performance dismantle prejudice organically. The afternoon continued with more tactical exercises, combining physical endurance with strategic thinking. Sarah excelled in every drill, moving efficiently, making calculated decisions, and handling her weapon with consistent precision. Her mental focus was her greatest asset. While others struggled with exhaustion and frustration, she maintained clarity, calmly analyzing each scenario. Observing instructors began taking notes, subtly adjusting their approach to acknowledge her skill without overtly challenging the base culture. The shift was quiet but real. Skepticism was gradually being replaced by cautious recognition. As the day drew toward evening, the final exercise tested not only physical stamina but emotional resilience. Trainees were faced with a scenario requiring split-second decisions under simulated threat, all while navigating a physically demanding course. Many faltered under the pressure, miscalculating jumps, dropping weapons, or losing focus. Sarah moved with quiet determination, her body and mind in harmony, each decision executed flawlessly. By the time she reached the finish, she was exhausted, sweat dripping into her eyes, muscles trembling, but she had completed the course without error. Her performance left a lasting impression on both instructors and peers. After the exercises, the trainees returned to the barracks, physically drained but mentally invigorated. The whispers of doubt had mostly faded, replaced by tentative admiration. Some male trainees, previously dismissive, approached her quietly, asking questions about her techniques and strategies. Sarah responded with calm explanations, never condescending, always measured. She realized then that quiet confidence paired with undeniable skill was a more effective tool than confrontation. The base culture was subtly shifting, one observation, one interaction at a time. That evening, Sarah reflected on the day in her small quarters, muscles aching, body soaked with sweat, and energy spent. The mental and emotional challenges had been as intense as the physical ones. Criticism, subtle hostility, and doubt were constant pressures, yet she had learned to navigate them with poise. She recognized that the true challenge of the SEAL base extended beyond endurance and skill. It involved managing perceptions, commanding respect without demanding it, and demonstrating resilience in every circumstance. Her quiet composure had become a weapon as effective as any rifle. As night fell, the barracks settled into a tense quiet, broken only by the occasional shuffle of boots or murmur of conversation. Sarah lay on her cot, her body screaming from exertion, yet her mind was alert, analyzing the day's events and planning for the next. She knew the journey ahead would be even tougher. Higher stakes, more demanding physical trials, and continued scrutiny from those who still doubted her. But she also understood that every step she had taken today had strengthened her position, carved out respect, and begun to change perceptions quietly, but irrevocably. Before sleep claimed her fully, Sarah allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. She had faced criticism, handled hostility, and emerged not only intact but stronger. The first day had tested her skill, the second day had tested her endurance, and this day had tested her resolve. She understood that resilience was as much about mental fortitude as physical prowess, and she had proven herself in both arenas. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sarah Thompson was ready, stronger, wiser, and silently commanding respect from those who had doubted her. As she closed her eyes, the faint sounds of the ocean mingled with her heartbeat, a reminder that the trials were ongoing, relentless, and transformative. She felt a surge of anticipation for the days ahead. Every obstacle, every drill, every whispered doubt would be met with skill, composure, and quiet determination. This was more than training. It was a journey of mastery, perception, and defiance of expectation. And Sarah was just getting started. The sun had barely risen over the SEAL base, yet the air was already tense with anticipation. Today was not about endurance or obstacle courses. It was about precision, composure, and mastery under the most exacting conditions. The instructors had announced a live-fire weapon drill, the kind that demanded every ounce of focus, skill, and mental fortitude. Every trainee, regardless of rank or prior performance, would be tested. And for Sarah Thompson, this was more than a challenge. It was an opportunity to show, unequivocally, that doubt and gender biases held no weight against preparation and ability. The range stretched out before them, targets arranged at varying distances, some partially obscured by barriers, others open but surrounded by hazards that tested accuracy under stress. The ground beneath the trainees' boots was uneven, shifting subtly as if mirroring the tension in the air. Instructors lined the perimeter, eyes scanning every movement, watching for the smallest error. The male trainees shifted nervously, whispering about who might falter first. Sarah's focus, however, remained entirely inward. Each breath was measured, each heartbeat synchronized to the rhythm of her movements. She approached her rifle with deliberate calm, her fingers tracing the familiar contours, checking the chamber and aligning the sights. Years of training had honed her touch, her instincts guiding every motion. Around her, some men fumbled with equipment, misaligned magazines, or hesitated under the pressure. A faint snicker rippled through a small cluster of skeptics, certain that Sarah would falter under the stress. She ignored them completely, letting their doubt fuel the fire of her focus rather than distract her. Her mind had been trained to perform under scrutiny, and today was no exception. The whistle sounded, signaling the start. Sarah lifted her rifle with controlled grace, shoulders steady, elbows locked. Her first shot found its mark dead center. The second, third, fourth each precise, controlled, and confident. The echo of the rifle in the enclosed range seemed to silence the room. Heads turned, eyes widening in astonishment. The men who had whispered, mocked, or doubted her now fell silent, unsure how to respond. Even the instructors, seasoned veterans of countless drills, exchanged glances, acknowledging the unexpected excellence before them. The drill intensified. Targets moved unpredictably, some requiring rapid repositioning and split-second decisions. Trainees had to reload under pressure, switch stances, and maintain accuracy while navigating the uneven terrain. Many faltered. Magazines jammed, shots missed, and frustration flared visibly on tired faces. Sarah, however, maintained a steady rhythm. Each movement was precise, instinctive yet deliberate. Her round struck every intended target, hitting some that were partially obscured or farther than expected. The quiet efficiency of her performance contrasted sharply with the frantic attempts of those around her, making her presence impossible to ignore. One of the skeptics, a tall, broad-shouldered man who had openly questioned her ability since arrival, attempted to challenge her. "You can't handle this pace," he barked, trying to force a reaction. Sarah didn't glance at him. She adjusted her grip, recalibrated her stance, and executed the next sequence with flawless accuracy. By the time he finished fumbling through the same targets, she had completed the drill with speed, precision, and unwavering composure. The room fell into stunned silence. Her performance had spoken louder than any retort ever could. As the drill progressed, the targets became increasingly complex, multiple moving elements, obstacles that forced awkward angles, and scenarios simulating high-stress combat. Sweat streamed down Sarah's face, her uniform clinging to her body. But she remained unshaken. Her breathing was calm, her movements fluid, and her mind razor-sharp. Every decision was calculated, every action deliberate. She became a model of efficiency and precision, a living demonstration of what preparation and focus could achieve under pressure. Observing instructors began to nod subtly, communicating quietly with each other. "She's handling this better than most of the men," one murmured. Another, more skeptical, simply shook his head in disbelief. The skeptics who had doubted her began to watch more carefully, some unwilling to admit it openly. The subtle shift was tangible. Respect was beginning to replace disbelief. Sarah's quiet determination and flawless execution had transformed the atmosphere on the range. What had begun as whispered doubt had turned into awe, unspoken yet universally acknowledged. The final segment of the drill required rapid transitions between targets, some hidden behind barriers, simulating real-world combat scenarios. Trainees had to anticipate movements, react to sudden changes, and maintain accuracy while under physical and mental strain. Many stumbled, misfired, or froze. Sarah, however, moved like a carefully tuned machine. Each transition was seamless, each shot deliberate. Her body and mind were perfectly synchronized. Her rifle became an extension of her will, and with each round fired, she silenced not only the targets, but the lingering whispers of doubt that had shadowed her since arrival. By the end of the exercise, the room was deathly quiet. The echo of her last shot faded into a heavy silence. Instructors, normally stoic and reserved, allowed themselves subtle glances of approval. The men who had openly doubted her were frozen, unsure how to respond. Some avoided eye contact, others shuffled awkwardly, a mixture of surprise and grudging respect on their faces. Sarah's calm, precise handling of her weapon had made the room's skepticism obsolete. Skill, focus, and preparation had spoken, louder than ridicule ever could. When the drill concluded, instructors approached her individually, offering concise, meaningful acknowledgement. Commander Reynolds, standing slightly apart, observed quietly before stepping forward. "Impressive," he said, voice low but clear, carrying authority. "Your performance today has set a benchmark. Precision under stress, composure under scrutiny, well done." Sarah nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor. No words of pride escaped her lips. She didn't need them. Recognition had been earned, not claimed. The subtle acknowledgement from those who mattered most carried more weight than any applause could. The male trainees lingered, some approaching with tentative questions, others avoiding interaction entirely. Sarah answered with quiet professionalism, explaining her methodology, her approach to maintaining focus under pressure, and strategies for accuracy. Her responses were concise, clear, and practical, offering insight without condescension. Gradually, a new dynamic emerged. Curiosity replaced skepticism, and tentative respect replaced quiet derision. She realized then that her quiet competence was reshaping not just the perception of her peers, but the culture of the base itself. By evening, the live fire drill had become the topic of hushed conversations across the base. Those who had doubted her presence now discussed her performance in tones of astonishment. Even those who resisted acknowledgement could not deny the precision, focus, and skill she had demonstrated. Sarah, however, remained focused on the next steps, the next drills, and the continuing journey. She knew that one day of excellence could shift perception, but consistent performance over time would cement it. Today had been a decisive step. As night settled over the cliffs, the base bathed in soft twilight, Sarah returned to her quarters. Her body was exhausted, every muscle aching, yet her mind was alive with analysis and reflection. She replayed each moment, each shot, each calculated movement, noting small areas for improvement while appreciating the flawless execution of the major elements. She understood that true mastery required not only physical skill, but continuous refinement and mental focus. Skill was temporary without discipline, and discipline required constant attention. Before sleep claimed her, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had faced doubt head-on, confronted skepticism with silent precision, and emerged not just intact but dominant. Today had been a turning point, the first major moment where her skill spoke louder than any prejudice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more complex drills, physical trials under fatigue, and continued scrutiny. But tonight, she had set the standard. She had shown the base, unequivocally, that ability transcended expectation, that focus silenced doubt, and that performance could rewrite perception. And as she lay on the narrow cot, listening to the distant waves crash against the cliffs, Sarah felt a calm certainty. She was ready for whatever the next day would bring. The skeptic's whispers had faded. Respect, tentative but undeniable, had begun to replace it. She closed her eyes, knowing that each moment of quiet focus, each precise action, had earned her a place not just on the range, but in the minds of those who had doubted her. The weapon drill had been more than a test, it had been proof, and proof, she knew, could not be ignored. The day after the live fire drill, the base seemed quieter than usual. It wasn't silence in the literal sense. Boots still pounded against concrete during morning runs. Instructors still barked orders, and the metallic clatter of weapons still echoed from the armory, but there was a different tone in the air. A subtle shift. Where there had once been smirks and whispers trailing Sarah Thompson like shadows, there was now something else. Silence laced with caution, eyes that lingered longer, and respect that nobody was ready to admit aloud. Sarah felt it when she walked into the mess hall. The same men who once scoffed at her now avoided direct confrontation. Some glanced her way and quickly looked down at their trays, while a few watched with cautious curiosity, as if studying her. It wasn't friendliness, not yet, but it wasn't hostility either. It was something in between uncertainty, recalibration. She carried her breakfast without acknowledging the stares, sat at a corner table, and ate in her usual quiet way. She had no intention of demanding acceptance. If it came, it would come through action, not words. It was later that morning, after another brutal run through the obstacle course, that Commander Reynolds approached her. The man was a living embodiment of the SEAL ethos, hardened, sharp-eyed, and utterly unshakable. For weeks, Sarah had noted how his gaze lingered on her during drills, never soft, always scrutinizing, as though searching for cracks in her armor. Now, he motioned for her to step aside. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, his voice even but commanding, "walk with me." She matched his pace as they moved down the gravel path toward the weapons depot. The other trainees noticed, but pretended not to. Reynolds wasn't known for casual conversations. If he pulled someone aside, it meant something. "I doubted you," he said abruptly, his eyes fixed forward. The words, coming from him, carried the weight of steel. "When you arrived, I figured you'd last 2 weeks, maybe 3. I've seen dozens burn out men and women. You didn't look any different to me." Sarah didn't flinch. She had no interest in defending herself with words. She waited. "But yesterday," his tone shifted, softer but not weak. "Yesterday, you shut me up. You shut all of us up." He paused, turning to look at her for the first time. His gaze was piercing, but not unkind. "I want to help you." This statement caught her off guard. "Help me, sir?" "You've proven you can shoot, climb, run, and fight. That much is clear. But being a SEAL is more than drills. It's about surviving the field, reading situations faster than anyone else, and knowing how to keep your team alive. That's not in the manuals. That's passed down." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "If you're willing, I'll pass it to you." Sarah considered his offer. She didn't need mentorship to prove herself. She was already doing that. But something in his tone told her this was different. It wasn't about recognition. It was about sharpening skills, about preparing for trials ahead she couldn't even imagine yet. She nodded once, "Yes, sir." From that day forward, Reynolds became more than just an instructor. He became a shadow in her training, not hovering, but guiding. His advice came in sharp, precise bursts, never long lectures, just razor-edged. Truths: don't just hit the target, learn its rhythm. Anticipate the move before it happens. Speed isn't about rushing. It's about economy. Cut wasted motion, and speed will follow. Don't wait for trust from your team. Command it with competence. People don't argue with results. Each lesson felt like a key, unlocking something deeper within her. Sarah found herself analyzing drills differently, reading not just the mechanics, but the flow beneath them. She began anticipating outcomes, moving with sharper purpose. What once felt like a test of endurance now felt like chess played at high velocity, mental and physical threads woven together seamlessly. Her fellow trainees noticed. During a tactical drill simulating close-quarters combat, Sarah's team cleared a building faster than any other. It wasn't just her shooting, it was the way she positioned, the way she directed teammates without saying much, the way she anticipated corners before others saw them. A younger trainee, drenched in sweat after the exercise, muttered under his breath, "How the hell does she do that?" Reynolds, standing at the edge of the room, caught Sarah's eye. His nod was nearly imperceptible, but she caught it. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. Not everyone accepted her growth gracefully. Some trainees resented her rise, feeling it cast shadows over their own performance. One evening in the barracks, the same trainee who had mocked her earlier slammed his locker shut and sneered, "You think Reynolds picked you because you're special? He's setting you up. Don't get comfortable." Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. His bitterness was its own defeat. Later, during a night navigation drill, when that same trainee lost his bearings in the dark, it was Sarah who calmly redirected him to safety without making a scene. Reynolds noticed. The others noticed too. Respect wasn't given, it was accruing, piece by piece. Weeks passed, and Reynolds began testing her more directly. He designed exercises meant to push her decision-making under pressure. One involved coordinating her team to rescue a hostage under fire. Another forced her to choose between covering her position or advancing to save a teammate. Each time, Sarah analyzed quickly, chose decisively, and executed with clarity. She didn't win every scenario, but she always learned, adjusted, and returned sharper. It was after one such drill that Reynolds spoke more personally than before. "You're doing something here, Thompson," he said quietly. "Something bigger than you realize. Every move you make, every time you outperform or outthink these men are watching. Whether they admit it or not, you're forcing them to rethink what belongs here. You're not just training. You're changing the ground beneath their feet." His words lingered with her long into the night. She hadn't come to the SEALs to change culture. She had come to prove herself, to test her limits. But Reynolds was right. Her presence, her performance, was reshaping the expectations of everyone around her. That realization gave her strength, but it also added weight. Every mistake now carried more than personal consequence. It risked reinforcing the doubts that still lurked, waiting to resurface. She carried that burden carefully, not as fear, but as responsibility. One evening, after another brutal day of physical and tactical tests, Sarah sat alone by the shoreline, watching waves crash against the rocks. Reynolds approached quietly, hands clasped behind his back. "You're carrying it well," he said. She glanced at him. "Carrying what, sir?" "The target on your back. Don't think I don't see it. Half of them want you to fail. Not because you're weak, but because if you succeed, it rewrites what they've believed for years. Change always has enemies." Sarah absorbed the words in silence. The tide rolled in and out, steady, relentless. "Let them hate it," Reynolds continued. "Just don't let it change you. Keep doing what you're doing. Skill is the only language they respect here. And you, Thompson, you're fluent." The mentorship grew from there. Not into friendship, Reynolds was too hard-edged for that, but into a bond forged in shared purpose. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was sharpening her, molding her into something the SEALs couldn't ignore. By the end of that training phase, Sarah no longer felt like an outsider fighting for legitimacy. She was still tested, still scrutinized, but she carried herself differently. Each drill, each mission, each evaluation felt less like a trial and more like an opportunity to lead, to prove, to redefine. And behind her, quietly, was Commander Reynolds watching, guiding, and ensuring that when the time came for her to step fully into the fire, she wouldn't just survive it. She would own it. The announcement came at dawn, carried by the crackle of the loudspeaker that cut through the base's morning quiet. All trainees report to the staging field immediately. Final evaluation begins now. Sarah's stomach tightened, not in fear, but in anticipation. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the culmination of months of sweat, pain, and resilience. Around her, the other trainees scrambled into gear, their faces a mix of nerves and grim determination. Nobody spoke. Words would have been wasted. The weight of the day was heavy enough. On the field, Commander Reynolds stood flanked by 2 senior officers. His presence was as sharp as ever, though Sarah thought she detected something different in his eyes, something like pride buried beneath the steel. "This evaluation," he barked, "is designed to strip you to your core. It is not about strength alone. It is about willpower, teamwork, and judgment under fire. You will be broken down. Some of you will not finish. Those who do will earn the right to move forward. Questions? Silence. Good. Load up." The trainees were herded onto military trucks that rumbled into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah sat among them, the vibrations of the engine shaking her bones, the weight of her gear pressing into her shoulders. Nobody spoke. They all knew the story's final evaluations were infamous for their brutality. Hours of drills, days without sleep, endless tests meant to simulate the chaos of combat. When the trucks finally halted, they found themselves in the middle of a rugged training ground, a place of mud, jagged hills, swamps, and dense woodland. The air smelled of wet earth and salt water. The first challenge began immediately. The teams were ordered to carry a massive log thick, soaked with water, and heavier than it looked over miles of uneven terrain. Sarah dug her shoulder into the wood, feeling it bite into her flesh, her boots sinking into mud with each step. The men beside her grunted, strained, cursed under their breath. The log didn't care. It demanded equal punishment from all. "Keep pace," Reynolds roared from the distance. "Fall behind, and you fail." Sarah's body screamed, but she steadied her breath, focused her mind. This was no longer about proving her place. It was about proving her endurance. She locked her rhythm, counted her steps, and ignored the burn in her muscles. Hours bled together. Finally, when they laid the log down at the checkpoint, several trainees collapsed in exhaustion. Sarah dropped to her knees, chest heaving, but her eyes stayed forward. The next trial was worse. Blindfolded, bound, and transported to an unknown location, each trainee was forced to navigate back to base, using only instinct, training, and survival skills. When Sarah's blindfold was ripped off, she found herself alone in a marsh, the sun dipping behind clouds, shadows stretching long. She moved quickly, recalling Reynolds' lessons: read the terrain, use the smallest signs, anticipate rather than react. Hours later, drenched, cut by thorns, and covered in mud, she stumbled onto higher ground where she reconnected with 2 others. She didn't know them well. Both had kept their distance in the barracks, but here, survival demanded cooperation. They moved as one, pooling knowledge, rationing strength. By dawn, they found the base perimeter together. The instructors weren't generous with praise, but Sarah noticed the subtle glance Reynolds gave her, a flicker of acknowledgement. But the hardest test was still waiting. The trainees were briefed on a final simulation, a mock mission designed to replicate the chaos of combat. They were tasked with infiltrating a fortified structure, rescuing a hostage, and extracting without losing lives. The environment was hostile, filled with instructors acting as enemies, traps hidden in the terrain, and relentless surprises. Sarah's squad moved through the forest toward their target. She kept her weapon ready, eyes scanning every movement of leaves and shadow. Gunfire cracked in the distant simulated rounds, but still painful on impact. Adrenaline surged. She remembered Reynolds' voice. Don't just hit the target. Learn its rhythm. The first ambush came quick. Smoke grenades exploded, and figures emerged from the trees. Sarah reacted instantly, taking cover, returning fire with calculated bursts. Her squad hesitated for a split second, but she shouted sharp commands, rallying them into formation. Together, they pushed through. Inside the building, the real trial began. Corridors twisted in confusing layouts, stairwells led to dead ends, and enemies waited around corners. Sarah felt the weight of every decision. Go left or right? Cover or advance? She knew hesitation was deadlier than error. At one point, a teammate froze in panic as simulated gunfire rattled against the wall. Sarah grabbed him by the vest, pulled him forward, and barked, "Move! I've got you!" Her tone carried authority that surprised even her. He obeyed. They reached the hostage, a mannequin fitted with sensors, and secured it for extraction. But as they moved, another ambush hit them hard. One of her men went down with a simulated fatal shot. The squad faltered, chaos threatening to unravel them. Sarah's instincts took over. She ordered a retreat to cover, laid suppressing fire, and coordinated their escape route with rapid precision. Her commands were crisp, her movements fearless. Bit by bit, they clawed their way out, carrying the hostage through smoke and fire until they breached the extraction zone. When it was over, the squad collapsed in exhaustion, lungs burning, sweat dripping from their faces. Sarah dropped her rifle, staring at the ground, her chest heaving. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Reynolds' voice boomed across. The field, outstanding. The single word sent a shockwave through the group. One by one, the instructors confirmed the results. Sarah's squad had completed the mission faster, and with fewer casualties than any other. She hadn't just survived the evaluation, she had led it to victory. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red, Reynolds called the trainees into formation. His eyes scanned the exhausted faces before landing on Sarah. "You came here with the weight of doubt on your shoulders," he said, his voice steady, echoing through the field. "Every man here thought you'd break. They said you couldn't handle the weight, couldn't handle the weapons, couldn't handle the fight. But today," he gestured toward her squad, still catching their breath, "you didn't just prove them wrong. You set the standard. You led when it mattered most." The men around her, still skeptical, but undeniably moved, shifted in silence. Some nodded, others simply stared. For Sarah, it wasn't the applause of victory that mattered. There was none. It was the undeniable shift in the air. No one could dismiss her now. No one could claim she didn't belong. The final evaluation wasn't just an end. It was the beginning of something larger. And deep inside, she knew the true battles were still to come. The final evaluation had ended, but the weight of its echoes lingered across the base. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn, as she always did. Her body ached with bruises, her arms still sore from carrying the hostage through smoke and fire. But the ache carried something new, a quiet pride. For the first time since stepping onto the base months ago, the whispers of doubt that had haunted her seemed to have vanished. The barracks were silent, not from indifference, but from respect unspoken. Outside, the sun broke across the horizon, washing the base in shades of gold. The sea air carried the faint sound of gulls. Sarah pulled on her fatigues and headed toward the field where all trainees were ordered to assemble. The entire base was buzzing word of the final evaluation had spread fast. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew who had led the best squad to victory. When she stepped onto the parade ground, eyes followed her not with mockery, but with something heavier, recognition. For weeks, she had endured smirks, side comments, and outright challenges. Now, the same men shifted in silence as she passed. Some nodded subtly, others avoided her gaze, but none dared whisper. Sarah had silenced the base not with words, but with proof. Commander Reynolds stood waiting at the podium, flanked by senior officers in dress uniforms. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone as ever. But Sarah remembered the flicker of pride she'd seen in his eyes after the mission. That memory steadied her heartbeat as she lined up with the others. "Attention!" The call rang out, and every trainee snapped into formation. Reynolds stepped forward, his boots striking the ground with authority. He scanned the rows of faces, lingering for just a breath longer when his gaze found Sarah. "You've endured the hardest training this country demands," he began, his voice booming across the field. "You've been broken, rebuilt, and tested beyond limits most people will never understand. Some of you barely survived. Others didn't make it to the end. But those who stand here now have earned something greater than titles. You've earned respect." The words sank deep into the ground, into their bones. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she held steady. Reynolds' tone shifted, "And among you, one stood out. Not for being the strongest, not for being the loudest, but for refusing to break when every single person doubted her." The entire formation stiffened. "Lieutenant Sarah Thompson," Reynolds called, his voice slicing through the air. "Step forward." For a moment, her boots felt anchored to the earth. Then she moved, steady, unhurried, until she stood before him. She saluted sharply, her jaw clenched to mask the storm inside her. Reynolds' face was still hard, but his words cut differently now. "You came here under fire before you even touched a weapon. They said you couldn't handle the pace, the weight, or the fight. They said you didn't belong. Yesterday, you proved that not only did you belong, you led. You carried a squad when others faltered. You brought them home. That," he paused, his gaze steady, "is what makes a SEAL." For the first time, the base erupted. Applause thundered across the field, not the scattered claps of politeness, but raw, unrestrained acknowledgement. Sarah stood frozen, her salute still locked, her chest tight. Reynolds leaned in slightly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You didn't just pass the test, you changed the standard." The words struck harder than any bullet she had dodged. When she returned to formation, the men who once scoffed now met her eyes. Some clapped her on the back. One trainee, the same man she had pulled forward in the final mission, whispered, "Would have been dead without you." Sarah gave no reply, only a curt nod. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need apologies. The silence of doubt had already been replaced by the silence of respect, and that was enough. That evening, after the ceremony, Sarah walked alone along the beach, just beyond the base. The tide lapped at the shore, the horizon painted in fiery streaks of sunset. The noise of the day faded with every step, leaving her alone with the sound of waves and the weight of everything she had endured. She thought of the first day stepping off the helicopter, hearing the whispers, feeling the stares burn into her back. She thought of the armory, of the first sneer when she picked up her rifle. She thought of the log carries, the endless swims, the suffocating mud. Every moment of doubt had sharpened her, and now, standing on this sand, she realized she hadn't just passed through the fire, she had walked out of it stronger. Her reflection stretched across the wet sand, fragmented by the tide. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Not as a trainee, not as a soldier fighting against prejudice, but as Sarah the girl who had once been told dreams like this weren't made for women. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly. She turned to see Commander Reynolds approaching, his hands tucked behind his back, his gaze softer than she'd ever seen. "You did more than anyone expected," he said simply. "Did I, sir?" Sarah asked, her tone careful. He smirked faintly. "I've been doing this long enough to know when history's being made. What you did out there wasn't just about passing tests. You broke something that's been holding this place back for too long. Sarah looked out at the ocean again. They won't forget it easily. No, Reynolds agreed. But neither will they forget you. And that's the difference. For a long time, they stood in silence, listening to the waves. Then Reynolds gave her a short nod. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Sarah smiled faintly. Yes, sir. Later that night, in the barracks, she found herself surrounded by the same men who once doubted her. They weren't loud. Their respect wasn't shown with cheers, but with something quieter, more lasting. They shifted space for her at the table. They included her in their conversations without hesitation. One even asked for her tips on rifle grip, something unthinkable just weeks earlier. It wasn't about being one of the guys. It wasn't about blending in. It was about standing out, being herself, and forcing them to recognize it. As lights out approached, Sarah lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The journey wasn't over. Being accepted at the base was only the first step. Ahead lay real missions, real risks, real battles that didn't care about gender or pride. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of victory. Because for the first time, she knew that when history told the story of women in the North SEALs, her name would be etched among the first who refused to be silenced. And somewhere deep inside, she knew she hadn't just answered the whispers. She had quieted the old base.